Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, welcoming you to our spotlight now. Dear friend of ours and fellow committee member, Elizabeth Fournier is our guest tonight. I want to remind everyone, please take the pledge if you are a consumer, and if you are a provider, take it as well and receive all the free benefits. So Gretchen, if you'd like to take it away and introduce Elizabeth.
Yeah. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi,
so Elizabeth is on our Global Green Burial Alliance committee, and she's also a funeral director up in Boring, Oregon. She has Cornerstone Funeral Home. She's also a celebrated author of The Green Reaper and the other books. The Green Reaper, the Green Burial Guidebook, and All Men Are Cremated Equal. And you can find those books at thegreenreaper.org and find out more about them. But she also does a lot of backyard burials in her local region, and we wanted to talk to her about it. So, Elizabeth, how's it going up there in Oregon, anyways, to start with?
We have a huge rainstorm, so we're getting ready for it. We've got the birdhouse is all secure. The sheep have extra bedding. We're expecting lots of rain to come tonight, so we'll see what happens.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, not good for backyard burial. It really caves in the grave, so we'll stay away from that for.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
One thing I know about Oregon, it has tons of mushrooms and mycelium already growing everywhere this time of year. I've seen it up at my dad's.
You don't need a special casket. You see that it's natural. It's part of the ecosphere and the biosphere, and it's just waiting for that juicy goodness of our bodies.
Yeah.
Well, there's one thing I'd like to say to the viewers is, Elizabeth is a dear friend and she is a pioneer in this movement. She is probably one of the best people that I've ever met. And as far as the funeral director is concerned, bar none, the best. So it's exciting to have you here. And I think it's exciting for the viewers to learn a little bit about the backyard burial movement and what that means and kind of where it's going and where it's legal and where it's not. So Elizabeth, if you could elaborate, that would be great.
Mr. Ed Bixby, what a lovely compliment coming from you. Thank you very much. So backyard burial is something that we can do in a lot of states. There's only a few that say, nope, this isn't something that we allow. So check with your local registration, because that is something that people don't always realize they can do. Now, I am in Oregon, and I am in a rural place in my county. And this county happens to say, yes, this is something that we can do. And that's how it's gardened by the companies that decide what's going on here. It's county, region, district, special permit. It's very simple to do. So we have so many families here who live out in the middle of nowhere who say, why do I need to buy a place in a cemetery if I can merely do this at home and have my loved one in the backyard? And I'm so happy to be able to tell them this is definitely something that we can do. And also many places throughout Oregon, there's actually many states, and weirdly enough, north of us in Washington, also south of us in California, both of them say no, private land burial isn't something we want to do. But the wheels keep moving, changes happen. Washington just passed a law which says, well, we can grandfather this in if we already have somebody on your property. So, well, pretty soon we'll get back to where we were 150 years ago, where everybody really is buried in their yard or someplace close to home.
So before we started the recording, we were talking about some of the things that that you have to do, which is not too much in Oregon. I mean, you don't need a special permit. You just need to state the disposition place on the death permit, you were saying?
Yeah, that's right. On the death certificate, rather than put the name of the cemetery, we were just typing private residence and putting an address. It's that simple. It's not like you have to go apply for a permit like you're building something. This is a very simple process. Doesn't cost any money, and it's something we can do. People often say, well, how can I do something green, but how can I be super, super economical? And the answer to that is you can have the space in your yard. You're not paying cemetery fees, and you're also probably hand digging or taking care of something with your own backhoe and maybe feeding people who are coming to your house, but it's a pretty simple process.
Mhm. And what
Well,
about like if that property is sold, is there any, I suppose just a disclosure would be, happen when in the sale of the property, right?
Yeah, I talk to my families when this is something they want to do. When they originally tell me they're interested in burial in their yard or on private property, I ask if I can come be on the property and just take a look around, because even though if they have enough acres and the owner does say, yes, this is something we can do, we want to make sure it's actually a good place to dig. And we can maybe get the vehicle there that has the body or whatever you're going to do. So there's just the logistics of everything. And then I tell people to make sure if this is something they want to do, that they really have to commit to have their loved one go back to the earth. If they think they might be moving soon, or it would really trouble them if the family got exchanged hands to other family they don't get along with, or maybe they would have to sell in the future, then maybe using a cemetery is the correct choice, because that cemetery will be there in perpetuity. You can always go visit, and that also is a perfectly wonderful place to have a burial. Just some people choose to do this in their private land. But again, there are rules. You do have to disclose it. I do tell people draw a map of the property, because even though you know that somebody's back in the blackberry bushes in the corner, blackberry bushes might not be there, or the people who have that information might not be able to provide that information when the time comes of selling that land. So make it known, maybe file it with your deed with the county, and just have it there, because it does need to be disclosed. These are human remains. And even if you've been buried naturally, and you probably are going back to the earth, this is America. Human remains matter. We track everybody. And that's a very big deal that someone is buried there.
Yeah, of course.
well, I agree. I agree, Elizabeth. That's very sound advice, because a lot of people wouldn't understand the logistics or understand that some soils are better than others to be buried in, or groundwater, seasonal high groundwater levels and things like that. My question to you, and probably the audience may be thinking the same thing, is there, being that it is legal, and I did hear you say about acreage, is there a minimum acreage requirement in Oregon for this, or what is the requirements there, or are there none?
So the states vary. In Oregon, how it reads is your county has to be okay with this. And then within your county, they have to outlaw where this can actually happen and make rules according to that, where you can take care of this with the zoning and planning committee. So if you're going to be in the yard, we want you to have at least 1 acre. And that's 1 acre free and clear. Not that you have a mortgage on the property or it's in your name, but you're paying the bank. You actually 100% own the land. So that's a really important thing to let people know about. 1 acre, we want to be set back from the roadway, set back from electric, set back from a watershed, 50 feet kind of around about is what we're looking for. And then when I'm at families' houses, a lot of times they'll have lots of property, and they'll just say, well, let's just decide we're going to do this way in the back corner, but right across the fence line might be someone's house. That's not really 50 yards away necessarily from another building or another residence. So we need to look at something else. Also, people love the idea of being right on the edge of the river or right next to a tree.
Mhm.
But working in reality of that grave has a better chance of having an issue if it's in that sandy loam by so far above, water. Or if we're going to be at the base of a tree, we're looking at the infrastructure of a tree and the roots and how things grow. And it might be a little complicated, not to necessarily bury there, but to actually dig in that space. You don't want to cut the roots of the tree and the headache of it, unless you've actually dug or been there. People don't always know that romantic vision of the tree is great, but to really get in there and be able to use equipment or to have the space or dig around is a little bit trickier there than people are aware of. So we want to make the ease and the flow on the family as well. So this is actually a really positive experience.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I just want to throw in there, it looks like, and I'm not sure how recently this was updated, but that home burials are allowed in all states except Washington, California, and Indiana. And then there's about 7 or 8 states that it's allowed only with a funeral director involved. So that is a lot of states that actually allow this. So if it's something, if people live out in a rural place and they didn't know about this, this is really good information for them to have.
Well, there would be one thing that I would say to that, Gretchen, and Elizabeth may know. They may be referring home burial maybe as home service, because a lot of the states I know require them to be protected under a certificate of authority, typically. So unless something's changed, Elizabeth, do you know a specific amount of states in particular that allow this type of burial? Or I mean, or has things changed that I?
Yeah, I believe.
Go ahead.
You know, that's good that she has that graph there because it depends on how things are worded. But as far as I know, the 5 states, the Alabama, California, Indiana, Louisiana, and Washington say absolutely not. But again, like I just mentioned earlier, Washington has now passed a bill that says if you already have a existing. Louisiana is tricky because there really aren't burials in ground there because the water table is so high. It's interesting, I'm looking at the graph now, and some show you have to have a funeral director. What I really encourage people to do is whatever county you live in, if you're interested, you call the local zoning and planning department or commission or district or whatever it's called where you live, and check in and see what they have to say about this. As long as things are legal and ethical, it's great. Rules change all the time. That's something to really be aware of. And also things we find online, we don't know who necessarily the citation is, who put the graph together, who's passing the information along. And even like I was talking to Gretchen before we were videoing, the aqua cremation is a tricky one because there's lots of graphs that show a map and show all the states where you can actually have aqua dissolution, but those are continually wrong because there's somebody who's coming onto the market with it, deciding it's something we can do. And in some states, there was a problem there. For instance, Ohio, first to legalize it, but then it wasn't legal. And then we kind of did the back and forth dance. So always check in. And I wouldn't necessarily say check in with your local funeral home, because if this isn't something that they do for a regular form of disposition, they might not know. But all funeral home licensees are governed by a board. And in California, it is a cemetery and funeral bureau. In Oregon, it's the Oregon Mortuary and Cemetery Board, but it's always called something like that. They govern the licenses of the individuals as well as the facilities. They would have all the rules of what is okay in the state.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yes. I mean, like you said, sound advice to check with your local municipality and check with the local board, because you learn something every day. And and if you can find your municipalities that allow it, then that's a good thing for sure.
Yeah. Now, even though I advocate for backyard burial, a lot of times a family wants to do it for reasons where they don't want to spend the money on a grave, or they feel like they just sort of want to be alternative, or whatever it is, or they have a favorite tree where mom read magazine. And then we have the conversation, because a lot of times choosing an actual cemetery is the right choice for a family. So it just depends on the scenario. And some people really have it made that their loved one has the luxury of dying at home. They have enough people to tend to that loved one. They can keep their loved one at home afterwards. They can have a funeral home involved, but nonetheless, they're going to keep their loved one. They're going to prepare the grave space. They're going to bring their loved one out back. They can do this seamless ceremony and not have their loved one leave the house. And that's absolutely beautiful, but that isn't every case scenario. So I think that a lot of times families want to do the backyard, but then there'll be someone in the family that says, hey, wait a second, I have rights to this home too. I don't want to do it, and they get ruled out. So it's definitely a special circumstance because there is just the logistics involved. There's also more than one person necessarily owning the property. Mm-hmm. And then also there's always the unknown. We never know if something will get foreclosed or somebody will have to move for a certain reason. I mean, life is really mysterious like that. So it's not always the right choice for people, but happy to give people the help if it's something they do want to do.
But if a property got foreclosed on and somebody was buried on it, would they disinter the person?
Not
Or
necessarily.
leave it?
We had a
Oh,
situation just right down the street here in Boring, Oregon, where I helped a family bury another family member on the property. And they decided that they were going to sell that property to the city of Portland. And the city of Portland is going to make a green space out of it now. And so the direct next of kin was a daughter. And then they asked the daughter, what do you want to do? And she said, well, I want to disinter mom and I want the bones to come home with me. Well, she lives in a place where you can't have home burial, so she can't bring the bones home with her. And then she said, well, I'm going to go ahead and have the mom exhumed. I want her to go to one of these places where the beetles will take care of all of the flesh, and I want a reticulated skeleton of mom in the living room. And we had to say, fascinating. However, that still would be considered home burial. She still would have your, no, we can't do this. Didn't want mom cremated, didn't want mom to go to another cemetery. So mom is still there. And the city of Portland says, fine, what we'll do, they had me come just to kind of double check and say, this is it. And I have pictures to match it up. So now that they know for sure this is the area, they're not going to make it known to the public. They will just have it quiet in a place that the public can't reach. And the public won't know. That woman can still rest in peace and had her wish of being on the land. She does not need to be disinterred. But if for some reason the family did come along and buy a property where someone was, it's up to them if they want to pour down their concrete and if they want to have a pad for a basketball court, or if they want to plant a tree or bushes, or if they want to go out every Mother's Day and bring flowers, they can treat it how they want. However, if they are going to disinter, this is human remains. We go through the steps of getting a funeral director, we disinter somebody, and then we have to put them someplace else. And that's when there has to be the choice of what are we going to do. But that's a whole other story because that depends on what people are interested in. And most people say, no, my person is on this property because it's what they really wanted to do.
yeah. Wow.
Well, I must say this is most interesting, and I think, Gretchen, you would
Really?
agree.
Yeah,
You would
it
agree
is
that
really interesting.
this is certainly a forum material. So I think, in the near future, we're going to have to bring Elizabeth and maybe some others to a monthly forum to have a broader discussion, because there are so many moving parts here. And Elizabeth, we do thank you for eloquently, letting us know what the process is and what may or may not happen. You do wonderful work. Gretchen, if you have any other questions for Elizabeth concerning this subject, but thank you, Elizabeth, from myself, and I do indeed would like to see you on a future forum to speak broader about this.
I do have one quick question. In your books, or in either of your books, do you talk about backyard burial and the legal parts of that?
I do. Now,
Okay.
my first book, All Men Are Cremated Equal, my 77 blind dates, was a slog through 77 blind dates because I was looking to get married. So that's sort of my first book. And, I'm always encouraging people to read that one. But boy, was it fun. So in my second book, The Green Reaper is about being a small town, eco-friendly undertaker. I talk about it through there. And then the Green Burial Guidebook actually is a book, which is a guidebook. And it talks about more meaty about natural burial, but I've got plenty of stories in it in the second book.
Oh, yeah, they're probably great books to have in one's library. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing this information with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.